Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Investing for the Long Term, hosted by Downing fund managers Judith McKenzie and Rosemary Banyard. During Season 2, Judith and Rosemary will take you on a journey through their extensive network of fund managers, company founders, CEOs, and key people from across the investment sphere. And today's guest, former Brewin Dolphin Executive Chairman Jamie Matheson, is certainly a key person in the investment sphere. During this insightful episode, Jamie reflects on his career and significant moments that shaped his journey. Judith recounts meeting Jamie during her university placement and the career opportunities that followed. Rosemary shares her long-standing connection with Jamie, including their professional intersections and involvement in charities that they work on together. They delve into Jamie's key philosophies on leadership and business and the importance of personal relationships building successful careers. Jamie reflects on his time as executive chairman of Brewin Dolphin and his experiences with the evolution of the financial industry. This episode provides valuable insights into the world of finance, the importance of personal integrity, and the value of giving back to the community. And just before we get started, please remember that all opinions and information are for educational purposes only and do not constitute investment advice. Investing carries a high level of risk and is not right for everyone. Always do your own research and seek financial advice from a regulated advisor in your country before making any financial decisions. With that being said, let's get started.
So Judith, tell us how you first met Jamie Matheson.
Rosemary, I was 19 and I was on a placement from university to learn more about finance. I was working in the corporate finance department of a company called Allied Provincial, no longer around anymore, amalgamated into goodness knows how many other companies. But Jamie was head of corporate broking at that point, I think, at Allied Provincial. And I was sent out of our little room on the corporate side to, I think, actually help out, believe it or not, on the privatisation of BT. So that probably dates it right away, doesn't it? And Jamie introduced me to his team and put me to work for a few weeks. But the corporate team and the corporate broking team were very close, unsurprisingly, because we were sharing working with corporate clients. So I spent my 10 or 12 months there and then went back to uni. And then I went off to another firm to work. And then I got a phone call a couple of years later from Jamie who said, "Would you like to come and work with me at Bell Lorry?" And I couldn't say no to that. It wasn't just a job at Bell Lorry. It was pretty much, I'm going to say bag carrier, but number 2 analyst. And that was working on some of the best Scottish PLCs at the time. So I got a real baptism of fire working with Jamie in my very early career. And I continued to do so for about 4 or 5 years after that, before I got lured into the dark side of fund management. But yeah, if it wasn't for Jamie, I probably wouldn't be sitting here now. What about you, Rosemary?
Well, I reckon in broad terms, I've known Jamie for 40 years, and I can't honestly remember the first time I met him, but I'm pretty sure of the context, which is that I was then an analyst at a stockbroker called James Capel in London, and we had a corporate client, and it was a company called William Baird, which was registered in Scotland and headquartered Glasgow, and Bell Lorry were broker to the company and James Capel were the other broker. I, as an analyst, and a colleague of Jamie's called Jamie Cumming were, I think, the 2 analysts. And so we would see one another at company meetings and we would be tasked with, to some extent, promoting and educating people about the company. And I think, Jamie, you were on the corporate side, corporate broking, advising William Baird. So that was the first time I met Jamie. If you roll on quite a few years, and we'll come and talk about this, Jamie rose to the height of being chair of Brewin Dolphin, very well-known wealth manager. At this time, I was at Schroders and we were major shareholders. And I then came across Jamie because he would invite I and my colleague, Andy Bruff, to lunch to discuss our views of the company as shareholders. And it was our opportunity to register any issues we had. And then we roll on to a lot more recently, and Jamie suggested that I might be interested in becoming a trustee of a charity that he's involved in, which is connected with Nelson's flagship, HMS Victory. So we've got quite a lot of touch points, which we discuss in the podcast. Jamie, can we start by asking you about your early career? And how you got into the finance and investment world.
Certainly, Rosemary. Where did it all begin? It began through nepotism. I got a job in my father's firm of stockbrokers in the school holidays, and I was in the post room, right at the bottom. I didn't go to university. I was best described as academically unremarkable. My father said to me, boy, if you turn up at the office on the 22nd, I think it was the 22nd of September, 1972, there's a job for you. And not the 23rd, there isn't. So don't get any notions about spawning around the world or anything like that. You come and work. And I started literally as a clerk. I did a couple of years doing that. Some of it was quite soul destroying, but hey ho, it was a lot better than being unemployed. Then after a couple of years, I was sent to London on secondment to 4 firms. And this really was a key part of getting into the stock market and investment. I started off at Mullins, which no longer exists, but at the time was the government broker. I then went to the Prudential on the investment side, which was quite something. It was a highly professional organization. After that, I went to what was at that stage a listed merchant bank called Donny Day. Donny Day still exists in some form today, but it's a very different organization from what it was then. After that, I did a couple of short secondments. One was in John Gavett, and the other was with Casino, which really was quite a privilege. I then went back to Glasgow to Parsons and Company with quite a bit of knowledge about London in my mind, and that was enormously helpful. It made me understand a little bit more about how the stock market worked, but more importantly, about the institutional market and people and a lot of connections. And that's how it started. I came back as an analyst, and there are some who would say that's pushing the definition of an analyst to the edge, but it's what I did. Neil Pegram famously kept a note I wrote on then Grampian Television as the most extraordinary piece of work he'd ever seen. I don't think he meant it as a compliment. He's a dear friend. And it all worked, eventually becoming a senior corporate salesman. And then after, believe it or not, 24 years, Allied Provincial was formed. It wasn't a great financial success. It was taken over by Greg Middleton, who had a big corporate department, and we would have disappeared. And we were approached by Bill Laurie, part of Brewin Dolphin. I then was, with my colleagues, invited to open a Glasgow office where Judith joined us, and that worked. It worked actually very well. We had a retention rate of clients that I think was extraordinary and probably never repeated. After that, I found myself 2 or 3 years later on the board of Brewin Dolphin, in charge of the total corporate and institutional broking business of Brewin Dolphin, because of course it included the very successful Wise Speak. And then shortly thereafter, our chief executive and the chairman were stepping down. And I was told that I was on a list. And I thought, yeah, that's fine. We've all been cannon fodder. We'll not worry too much about that. And in fact, at first, my reaction was, no, it's not for me. And I was persuaded that at least put your hat in the ring. I did. And I went for this interview. And the trick question came along. Do you know why you're here? And I said to my colleague, because my predecessor, John Hall, is retiring. And at that point, my colleague, Nick Hood, said, it's not just that. Actually, we're interviewing 4 of you for that post, but we're interviewing 1 of you for the post of the executive chairman, i.e. both roles. And all of a sudden, my world was about to change. And long story short, I got the appointment. And for the last 8 years of my full-time career, I was the executive chairman of Brewin Dolphin. It was a huge privilege. I loved it. I loved every day of it. There were some difficult moments, but it was fantastic. I felt enormously privileged. I was enormously privileged. As I say, met some amazing people.
So, Jamie, I mean, it's amazing that you say, almost like by accident, in fact, I wrote it down, you said you found yourself on the board of Brewin Dolphin. You don't just suddenly wake up and find yourself on the board of something. You're pretty modest about your career. And, it's interesting that you obviously had a good smattering of wide experience in your early career. But then I saw it, I suppose, when you were at Brewin. You mentioned that retention rate, or Bell Laurie, you mentioned that retention rate with clients, and that's all got to do with personal service. And that's certainly something that you always led on. And where did that come from?
I suppose it started with Dad. He was a stockbroker, as I said, and he really put a lot of effort into personal service. He got to know his clients. He made a real effort to do that. And I suppose that's where it started. After Dad retired, I worked with Bernard Solomons, who became the senior partner of the firm.
Yeah.
And Bernard was also very good at people stuff, knowing the clients. He was good at relationships with clients. So my seniors had made it perfectly clear that's how you do it. And in those days, particularly, relationships were everything. Not so now, I suspect. I stepped away from the business a long time ago. But I believe no matter what a business does, it's about people. No people, no business. Even when the procurement departments and all this sort of thing get involved, people run businesses still. Whether that will be the same in 100 years' time, I don't know. But for now, I'm a great believer in people. Always have been. And I have always believed in my own colleagues and did my level best to treat them with respect, loyalty, and where necessary, be there to help out. And if they were in bother about something, got to stand by them.
Yeah, absolutely.
What if you reflect back to, I guess, the stockbroking days, first of all? Can you just maybe share with us some of the big changes that you might have seen?
Yeah, everybody talks about Big Bang 1987. I suppose it was the beginning of a real change. In my early days, I used to go onto the stock exchange floor with a paper and pencil and do trades. As a blue button, it was go and get prices, just run around like a skivvy, for the want of a better word. But it was paper and pencil. It was also word of mouth. It was also, my word was my bond. That was absolutely paramount. And you lost your reputation but once. Take years to build it. You can lose it in a second. My word was my bond. Now it's all electronic. And from that point of view, it's a button you press and a trade is done. And if you've made a mistake, devil mend you, because it's going to cost somebody. Whereas back in the day, if you were known to be honest and decent, if you had made a mistake, you could go to your counterparty and say, oops, I've got the order wrong. It shouldn't have been 100,000. It should have been 10,000. You needed to be quick, but generally speaking, everything was on trust. Whereas now, virtually nothing is on trust. Now, bear in mind that I've been out of the market on a full-time sense for 12 years. I suspect it's even less on trust now than it was when I stepped down from full-time. But I'm still involved in the investment world. But everything is electronic. So that's the massive change. Personalities are more difficult to find. You have some relationships, I suspect, but they're pretty thin compared to what they were when, for instance, Rosemary, when you and I met, you got to know people. Judith, you probably would recall that as well.
Most certainly. Yeah, I had the pleasure of accompanying you to London. I remember you took me out for the first time, and we went down to the city, and it was probably quite unfamiliar to me. First thing that I noticed was that we had to get the very first flight, even though the first meeting was at 11 o'clock in the morning. And so we were on the red eye at, I don't know, 5:30, 5:45 or whatever it was. And I had plucked up the courage to ask you why we were on the red eye. And you said, we need to get our shoes shined first. We need to look smart. So, okay, right. We're number one. Let's get our shoes shined for the river. And you probably don't remember it, Rosemary, but there was a little shoe shine guy just at Heathrow Airport, wasn't there? So we got off the plane and had our shoes shine. But that was, although a nice anecdote, it was symptomatic of the process and the structure you put around the day. You never rushed anything. In today's world, you might have 5 or 6 meetings in a day. We went in to see clients and you literally chatted and took the time with them. If they wanted to chat for 20 minutes, so be it. If they wanted to chat for an hour and 20 or go out for lunch, then you afforded them the time. And that really I could see you building those relationships literally as we went. And that was something that I then took and learned. I don't necessarily get my shoes shined now, but I certainly learned that you should look smart and you should be paying attention to what people are saying.
Yeah, Judith, when I chair a meeting now, I still wear dark blue suit, collar and tie. That doesn't
I
change.
expected that.
Jamie, have you got any interesting anecdotes for us from those days?
Where do I begin thinking about it?
Any that pertain to us, perhaps?
Oh dear. Yes, there is one, and Judith, please forgive me. When Judith and I would go off on a trip or something like that, come back from London, and then we'd walk into the office and our lovely colleagues would say, oh, here he comes with his pet lamb. And Judith would turn around and say, yes, master. And this day you still recount from time to time. Given Judith the success of your career, I was having lunch with Rosemary and Andy maybe about a year ago, and Rosemary said, Pet Lamb sends her best regard. Astonished at this. That's certainly one.
Yeah, I do remember. I remember more than that. I remember probably one day when I was annoying you a little bit and calling you master overly much, and you said PL, pet lamb, mint sauce. So you were just putting me in my place, and a very well-timed phrase.
I had forgotten that, but yes, you did wind me up. It was very easy. Mint sauce.
Go on, tell us something about Rosemary then. You must find something in your memory about a story about Rosemary.
I was terrified of Rosemary.
Well, most people are.
I remember it was after the Brewin days. The Brewin days, they were fairly straightforward. Brewin was doing okay. We're shooting the lights out, I don't think, but we were growing steadily, and Andy and Rosemary remained supportive shareholders. But I do remember when I did incur her, not wrath, but yeah, let's say mild disappointment when I had retired from Brewin's about a year. It was actually very funny. I went in to see Rosemary, and Bruins, the new team, were just on their way out, having seen Rosemary. I was in as the chairman of the REMCOM of a firm called Latchways.
Oh, yes.
Rosemary was not very happy with me for the progress that I wasn't making on remuneration policy. And what Rosemary didn't know was that we were actually about to announce that we were subject to an offer. And of course, Rosemary didn't know that, so didn't hold back in telling me that it was not very impressive. I think I remember the exact phrase, not much progress so far, Jamie. Oh, God. And I couldn't say a word. And about 3 months later, we were having lunch together. Do you remember that meeting?
I remember the meeting. I think I remember asking why they only had 4 board meetings a year. Was that right?
Yes.
And how could they possibly run a business with only 4 board meetings? Yeah, I think that was the gist of some of it.
I think there was only 4 board meetings a year. But my personal view, at least 6, and possibly with Bruins, we had 8. And we were more or less monthly, bar the sort of the August and this sort of thing. But I think we had 8 a year. I thought it was fine, but I get your point. 4 is not enough. Even some of the tiny companies that I'm involved in now, it's usually 6 and ad hoc as well, because with tiny companies, you need them.
Yeah, yes.
Thinking about Brewin Dolphin, and as you described, you went to the very top. What did that feel like? You know, executive chairman, probably not a role that is much in use now, but big responsibilities in a lot of ways. What would you say was most rewarding at that period, and what were the most difficult things?
The most difficult, saying goodbye to people for one reason or another. That was horrible. Really hated that. But occasionally it had to be done. That's difficult decisions. That's part of being responsible, being in charge. I hated that. The most challenging time was probably the banking crisis, because everybody was in a complete blind panic. I saw no point in that. If everybody panicked, you would end up with money being burst and it would become useless. And that was probably the biggest challenge as a leader, saying, guys, girls, hold on, let this all pan out. The worst thing we can do is panic. And I remember I did quite a lot of the firm's media stuff, and I had done that back in the days at Bell Laurie. Judith, you'll remember that. I was the talking head of the firm, and I got invited to go on to the Today program right in the middle of the crisis. So I was interviewed on the roof terrace at Smithfield Street, and the guy said, "What's your advice to clients?" And I gave the only advice I could, and that was, don't panic. If you own good assets, hold them. And I went away, went back downstairs to my desk and thought, that's my career over. I thought they were thinking, silly boy. Then one or two of the troops came in and said, I've just had a client on the phone say, it was so reassuring to hear you say that to them. How did I feel about the job? I think when they told me, and it was my own board colleague, that I was being interviewed for this dual role, suddenly I realized that actually this was serious, very serious. I think I said earlier, I felt enormously privileged. And I felt that every single morning when I got up and went into the office, I pinched myself genuinely. I thought, my goodness, is this me? Because I wasn't a man with a plan. I just got a job when I left school and did my best, but I never really got a plan. So to find myself sitting at the head of one of Britain's biggest wealth managers, it was just a privilege. I loved it. I loved every minute of it, bar, as I say, saying cheerio to people. I just felt what a privilege. I think the key was surrounding myself with good people. Yeah. And that I think I did. And very good people round about me. And I realized having the dual role, I actually needed a very good, strong executive to say, no, chairman, that's not a good idea. Because I was conscious of the fact that it was the dual role. And you're absolutely right, Rosemary. It's not something that, it's in fact in the financial sector now, it's illegal. CA won't countenance it. And by the time I left, one of the reasons why I stepped down when I did was that they were beginning to get really quite shirty about it. But it happened to coincide with the timing that I had said I would do when I was interviewed. The guys on the board, and it was only men in those days, said, how long would I be prepared to do a job like this for? And I said, between 7 and 9 years. I did it for 8. By the time I'd finished, incidentally, the board was well represented.
Good.
How you'd like.
I expected it. And more recently, and after your time there, you became a bit more involved in the world that we're in, boutique fund managers. I think you chaired Saracen for a good while as well. And you're, I think, still involved with Asset Co in some way too. How have you found that difference? Because you're coming out of a very large one, as you say, one of the largest wealth management firms in the UK and Europe, and then starting to go back into smaller companies that I suppose was your heritage back in the day. But how did you find it going back into a smaller fund management firm, especially boutiques? And boutiques are very close to our heart, given that they're difficult places to be, but they're also very rewarding for investors if you get it right.
Let's ask myself the question, what do I like about boutiques? People. You're closely involved with people. Saracen, which was the first one I went into after Bruins, Graham Campbell, who was the then chief exec, took me out to lunch not long after I stepped down, and he said, how would you like to come and join us and be a director of Saracen? And I had said, I really don't want to get involved with the regulator again. It's tough. They are very demanding, and rightly so. I just thought, I don't need to do that. And anyway, I said, Graham, I'll be no use to you whatsoever. Saracen is the size of one of the smallest Brewin offices. It'll be making me a director. It's a sledgehammer to crack a nut. This went on for 18 months, every month's lunch. And it was always in the same restaurant. And it was always a sort of lunch that Graham and I still enjoyed today. A proper old-fashioned lunch. And eventually he said, listen, will you not reconsider? I said, Graham, it's a non-exec. It wouldn't work. Maybe a chairman, but he said, that'll do fine. And I became chairman. He wanted some help with reorganizing it. Jim Fisher wanted to step back. So I became chairman of Saracen, which I really enjoyed. Then Asset Co became what it is now, a fund management house. And Martin Gilbert phoned me one Sunday night and said, would you guys be interested in selling Saracen to us? And essentially, Graham and I, between us, had enough of the company that we could give him a pretty short answer. I said, give me 5 minutes, I'll phone Graham. Graham said, yeah, because Graham and I were both in our 60s and conscious that we had people that were employed, we had clients, and we needed to think of a solution. So that happened. Then I carried on chairing Saracen for a short time as a subsidiary. And then SVM was bought very shortly thereafter. And I became chairman of the combined company, which is now the ACV for the Asset Co's interest. So it's grown a bit, but I'm still enjoying the people side of it. Enjoy it very much. I did do the same for Aberdeen Fund Managers for 6 years. I stepped up back from that in November, but that was a very different thing, very large organization, totally different dynamics. But I'm still involved with SVM, part of Asset Co, and I enjoy that very much, and working with nice people. My fellow non-exec is somebody I respect enormously in the time I've got to know him. So I'm still at it.
Not giving up yet. Good.
No, not yet.
I mean, one of the many challenges in boutiques, as we know, is there's a lot of regulatory challenge, as you've said, throughout the industry. And there's fee pressure. And if you're in the UK, there's other pressures at the moment. But just thinking about boutiques and putting boutiques together, you've got a lot of sort of people there. What are your thoughts about consolidating boutiques as a general concept? And how do you think about the challenges there with people?
That's really what Asset Co is all about, because it's got river, and that was very much the plan. And I haven't discussed it with Martin recently, but I'm assuming boldly that remains the plan. Consolidation is all jolly fine, but if you lose the raison d'etre of the business, then you've consolidated fresh air. So it's got to be handled very carefully.
Yeah.
Make sure you keep and nurture your talent. Reduce costs where you can, obviously. Refine your services, sales, marketing, that sort of thing. Get the best out of the pool of talent that you have, but it has to be done with care, because as we said right at the beginning, the sector is still a people business, even though there are, shall we say, non-people barriers in place. One of the big examples is the big wealth managers now put enormous pressure on their own fund managers to follow a list.
Yes.
You have gatekeepers and all this sort of thing. When I was at Bruins, I did say to those that would consider themselves gatekeepers, yeah, that's all jolly good, but these people may be shareholders. We're a public company. You will see them. And if you decide no, once you've seen them, okay, but you will do them the courtesy of seeing them because they bothered to come and see us. But that was particular because I understood the industry, and I was also very conscious that our shareholders weren't always the size of Schroders. We had some very small ones.
Yes.
Everyone was done the courtesy and have been seen. Nowadays, you know it as well as I, as boutiques, some of the wealth managers won't even see us, and that's tedious.
Yeah.
Yeah, we agree.
Yeah, we do agree. And we do think it will come round again at some point.
The opportunity to outperform is
Exactly.
far greater in a boutique, far greater. And if I made Rosemary, I bought into a fund that you launched, and the performance was spectacular in the first year. And I didn't look at it. I just thought, I'm going to back Rosemary because she's a pal. And then I met you and said, how's it going? And she said, 50%. Oh, boutique, there you go.
Yeah, it's very difficult to get that kind of outperformance if you're sitting in a large house, isn't it? Everybody doing the same thing. That kind of leads us on to maybe a bit of a loaded question. How would you improve the current landscape for the UK market just to try and get more companies to list here like they used to do back in the day and stop these constant delistings? Any wise tips for Rachel Reeve?
Yeah, right. That's a loaded question. We're daft. We don't think about incentivizing businesses to come here. We don't give due consideration to taxation. It's a weapon as far as governments are concerned, and it certainly seems to be used as a weapon at the moment rather than a tool to help make things happen. And I think that's something that governments need to think about. Ireland has absolutely run rings round many countries in the world. And yesterday's Telegraph, with our new president in America, said this is going to stop. We have American companies in England that are paying lots of money to Ireland and hee-haw to America, not having this. So we could have been a lot smarter, in my opinion. I'm also going to tell you about something that drives me mad. And one or two people have felt the sharp edge of my tongue when I've been chairing meetings. And that is when fund managers use the expression bet. That drives me nuts. Absolutely nuts. And I really have gone for people who said that. I would say, forgive me, but do you not go to William Hill for that? They look at me slightly askance. I say, we are in the business of looking after our clients' money. The stock market is about looking after clients. Yeah. It's not about making bets. And I do go mad when I hear it. And I read it in the papers. There's nothing much I can do about it. But if it's ever said in a meeting I'm chairing, the poor soul that says it knows about it. It's betting later.
Good. Absolutely. I guess the next two questions are going to be linked in some way. So the first question, Jamie, is what's your biggest passion?
I've sailed all my life, but I had always, up until it was my early 40s, was very happy to sail on other people's boats and vowed that I had no need or desire to own a boat. I got that wrong. And I ended up at one stage with 4 boats. The boats have been a big thing for me. The sea has been a big thing for me. Country sports also a big thing for me. But boats, I own still the old Morning Cloud called Opposition. That was Ted Heath's racing yacht. But I also was in partnership with a couple of other well-known businessmen in a yacht called Mariquita, which is probably the most photographed classic yacht in the world. Beautiful boat, 120 odd feet long, race crew of 23. So that was a big passion. Opposition, or Morning Cloud as she was, race crew of 12. So a big commitment to these yachts. Mariquita is gone. Opposition is for sale. I think I've done that. My late wife, Angela, was a big part of that. I miss Angela terribly, as you can imagine. And without her, I think my interest in that has waned. I look back on it and think it was wonderful, but I've done that.
So is there a connection between your love of boats and your involvement in HMS Victory?
Very definitely. I was asked to join the Finance and Investment Committee initially, but my interest really took off when I was asked by Vice Admiral Sir Tim Lawrence if I would care to join the committee, which was chaired in those days by Julian Cazalet or Cazenove. And then Tim Lawrence stepped down from his position as director on the technical committee for the restoration. And Martin Hayton, who chaired it, sadly, he died. I had taken Tim's place. Martin suddenly died, and very quickly the Admiral of the fleet, the Lord Boyce, to give him his full title. And Sir Tim approached me and said, well, of all the trustees, you're the one that knows most about wooden ships. So I became the chair of the technical committee, and I loved that. I stopped doing that about 18 months ago. I was due to step down, but the Gosling Foundation, who are the major benefactors of the ship, had never had a representative. I knew Adam Gosling, as did Sir Tim, and he felt no need to appoint a representative. So Tim had gone, I was going, and Adam said, when are you going? At the end of February. Oh, so you'll be clear by the beginning of March. I said, yeah, good. Well, we referenced us, and so I'm still on it.
No escape.
No escape, and wooden ships mean a lot to me. I suppose in a funny sort of way, it scratches a bit of an itch because my late father, during the Second World War, he was a naval officer and had an ambition, which I didn't fulfill for him, that I became a naval officer. I didn't join the Navy. I went to the stock market. But here I am at the end, this stage of my career. The end sounds a bit fatalistic. Shall we say at the north end? And I'm now heavily involved in the flagship of the fleet. That means a lot to me, and it does scratch a bit of an itch that I'm now with admirals, which is great fun. Sometimes Mike could be quite intimidating. A great chap, I got on with him quite well, but when Mike was not amused, one knew it.
Yes, indeed. What would you say good qualities to have on a board as a trustee of a major charity?
You have to be interested in what the charity does, first and foremost. If you don't have that, you're wasting your time and everybody else's. You need to care. You need to be happy to listen to other people, and you need to be even happier to make your own opinion known when asked. There's no point in sitting there just listening and doing nothing. You add nothing unless you're prepared to make your opinion known when asked. You have to be well behaved. There's no point in not treating other people with respect. It just doesn't work if you do that. Decency, honesty, good manners, listen to other people, and be prepared to speak without being terrified.
I think that's great advice for any board member, not just those in charities, isn't it? And whether you're chair or a non-exec. I think if a lot of non-execs followed that mantra, then we'd probably have slightly better governed companies, I suspect, Rosemary, wouldn't we? Indeed. Yeah.
The key is you've got care.
Yeah.
And when it comes to boards in general, I think it's important to remember that while, yes, you are responsible for some issues of governance, you are there to help the company advance. Yes, you've got to keep an eye on certain things, and if you don't think it's right, say so. But you are there to help make it work. And I think sometimes people get a little bit zealous and forget that actually they're there to make it work. They're not just there to throw stones at the executive. I think directors that are doing that, they're taking their fee and not adding value.
Yeah, very true. Can you think of maybe the proudest achievement in your career? There have been so many, it must be difficult to single out one.
I don't go for being proud of stuff. It's not me. If I look back, there were many, many happy moments in my career. I think when we opened the Glasgow office of Bell Lorry and it worked, that was fabulous. And each time we had a decent set of results, that was also fabulous. But let's be clear, that wasn't my doing. That was the people in the firm that did that. I just happened to have the privilege of being the leader. So those always gave me enormous pleasure. And along with what went on a day-to-day basis, somebody said to me once, outside the firm, connected, what were the sort of big thrills? And I suppose the first one was when in 2012, in our 250th anniversary year, we won the overall prize for our garden at Chelsea, Cleve West Design Garden. That was an amazing feeling, the sort of buzz of that. I remember that well. And the other occasion that I got a real buzz out of, I was invited to read the lesson as chairman of Bruins at one of the carol services at Westminster Abbey. 2,500 people there. And boy, did I know that I was privileged doing that. That was, I loved that. A very special occasion. I think there were lots of special occasions, but I don't like using the word proud.
No, but I think even the way you're talking about it, you can tell that these are pinch yourself type moments, aren't they? And they're all very different. They're all very different.
Yeah. I've had many happy times. I think that's how I would put it. Many happy times. And as I say, pride is not something I get too worked up about.
It's very wise. Very wise.
Pride and fall come to mind.
Yeah, very true.
So looking back, what advice would you give to your young self?
Always do what you think is right. Always be honest, always be decent and respectful of other people. Be consistent and courteous. Work hard, and working hard doesn't preclude any of the aforementioned things at all. I don't go in for the trampling on people approach to life. I know a lot of leaders do. I never did, and I don't to this day condone that sort of behavior. It's about decency. It goes back to what I said at the beginning. Business is made of people. Treat people properly, both your own people, your stakeholders, that's your shareholders, and your customers. Always remember that businesses are made by people. Don't forget it. And one of the things I do say to younger folk is, much as you must work hard, don't lose sight of the fact that you are working in order to live. You're not living in order to work. So remember, when you go home to family at night, that's what you're doing it for. It doesn't mean you don't work as hard as you possibly can, but don't lose sight of what's important.
It says it all, really, doesn't it, Rosemary?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, different track now. What book would you recommend to listeners, or what podcast would you recommend to listeners?
Apart from this one.
See, you're on it already, Jamie. You're all over it.
I have a terrible habit of reading what I would call airport trash.
Excellent. What are you reading at the moment then?
At the moment, I'm reading a book by a man called William Hanson on just good manners. I like that sort of thing. And I'm reading it at the moment.
That's great. Yeah, that's very fair. Doesn't get
Educating
more topical than that.
And it is quite amusing. And the odd lesson learned, most of it I've probably put into practice. One never knows everything.
Oh, indeed. Great. Is there anything we should have asked you?
I don't think so, ladies. I think you certainly covered everything I think I would have asked myself. And I hope I've given you the answers that make for good listening for your audience. I don't think you've missed anything. You both know what I've done since leaving Bruins. There's quite a bit of charity work that I do. I've just stepped back from the Beats and Cancer charity after nearly 12 years. And I would say to anybody that's getting towards the north end of their career, don't forget to put something back. That I think is very important. It was an unfortunate coincidence that, of course, I took that on, and Angela, my late wife, she died of cancer, but it didn't put me off being involved. Far from it. It was a sharper lesson than I probably wished on the value of doing that sort of thing. Don't forget to put something back.
Again, good advice. Thank you, Jamie. It's been a fantastic canter through an amazing career, some of which Rosemary and I have had the pleasure to be part of. And I am absolutely certain that there'll be a lot more north in your life going forward as well in terms of other activities. So we look forward to seeing what that is.
Thanks, Judith, and thank you for your support during your time when we worked together. And Rosemary, likewise, thank you for your support and friendship and in the things we do now. And it just reminds me that I think it's my shout to organise lunch with you and Andy.
You might find pet lamb gate crashing it.
That's fine.
There'll be a lamb gambling about the place. Slightly older mutton now, not lamb, I suspect.
Well, I think the city saying, Jamie, going back to everything to do with your word, will be dealt.
Yes, it's dealt. Ladies, thanks very much. That's been fun. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today. Thanks for listening. And in the next episode, Judith and Rosemary will introduce you to another key person from their extensive network from across the investment sphere. If you've liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave a comment. The more feedback we get, the more value we can offer. And to learn more about Judith, Rosemary and Downing, please visit www.downingfundmanagers.co.uk. All the links are just below in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to speaking to you in our next episode. Hope you have a great day, and bye for now.